Welcome to the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. I'm Kevin C. Neese.
And I'm Mike Poteet, and you're listening to episode 71, reviewing Assimilation.
And then we'll find out who wins Star Trek trivia right after our main topic, discussing Star Trek Picard Season 2, Episode 3, Assimilation. It's going to be a great conversation. Stick around. Well, have you been assimilated yet, Mike?
Not yet.
I don't even know how.
I'm resisting, but I hear resistance is futile, so
we'll see.
We'll see how that turns out for me.
I'm not sure how I expected you to respond to that question, but hey, you know, saying the first thing that comes in my head seems to be a good plan most of the time, so we'll just go with it. Oh boy. Well,
how have you been since our last talk?
Since I have been cooling down since our last talk because it's hot in here.
I'm glad. That makes me think of. Have you seen Sunday in the Park with George, the Stephen Sondheim musical?
Yes, so good.
Yeah, he ends the first act freezing everybody in place in that famous painting, and then the second act, the curtain comes up and they're singing, "It's hot up here. It's hot and it's monotonous." So, you know, at least you're not as hot as the characters in a 100-year-old, 200-year-old painting.
Right, exactly. Wow. That's a connection I never would have made.
That's a long, I admit, that's a long way
long
to go
walk,
for a
man.
Connection.
Oh, that was great. Well, it is also a thing that is hot is our winning streak on Star Trek trivia, because you and
I think hot is a generous description.
Well, you and I tied.
Star Trek trivia.
You and I tied last episode with an epic score of 1. So let's see if we can keep this streak going.
And, you know,
sir.
Of course, the scary thing is this is a subject we like and consider ourselves expert in.
Right. I would say, and I'm expert in my window on Star Trek.
All right. Well, let's see how we do. Let's see how far that window opens this week.
All right, let's see.
Or this episode, rather, for these 3 Star Trek trivia questions not seen by us before.
Okay.
Number 1. Where do a small number of Borg drones go during regeneration that allows them to exist as individuals?
All right. Now that's a Voyager question
I think I know this
I'm
one,
fairly sure I know the answer. As I said, there are certain parts of Voyager I have. This is continuing our conversation from last episode. If those of you who didn't hear it, there are certain parts of Voyager that I have studied and know very well. And I believe that is one of them. All right. Go ahead.
All right. Number 2. I'm going to read this exactly as it's on the card. When does the Federation initiate protocol for, in quotes, first contact?
Okay.
I think I know what they're going for, but that's some interesting typography. So, all right.
They put it in quotation marks, you think is interesting?
They did, and they capitalized it. When does the Federation initiate protocol for first contact? And you can't see me making air quotes since we're an audio podcast. But
when it's time,
but I think I know what they're going for.
When it's time to have Jonathan Frakes direct a Borg movie, that's.
Well, now wouldn't that be italicized? Because there was a TNG episode that calls for a contact as well.
That's true.
But I'm putting an answer down that I think is what they're going for, but. I always wonder if like the companies get Trekkies to edit a game like this, you know, because I don't think a true fan would physically write the question that way, but I'm probably overthinking things.
Maybe.
It's been known to happen. All right. Number 3, you ready?
Yes.
All right. This was a fun one, I think. Wallace Shawn played Grand Nagus Zek in Deep Space Nine. Name the 1980s fantasy film directed by Rob Reiner in which he played the Buttercup kidnapping Vizzini.
I was typing it before you finished asking. I love him, by the way.
He is a great actor, and this movie, if I think I have the answer correct, is a great movie.
Yes,
so we shall see.
And his portrayal of Zek is amazing too. There's just nobody better.
Yes,
he's Just one of those
Quark.
one of those gifts to Star Trek, Mr. Wallace-Shawn. Love it.
Absolutely.
It was so funny. I think the first time my son saw Wallace-Shawn on the screen, it might have been an episode. Yeah, I think it was an episode of Young Sheldon. Was on.
Oh, I've not watched that.
Yeah.
Is he on that regularly?
Yeah, well, he is. He's on that pretty frequently. And so see, there's a reason to watch. But
there you go.
My son is a big animation fan. You know, he's very much into animation, and so he saw Wallace-Shawn and he said, "Oh, you know, he's the voice of the dinosaur from Toy Story." And I was like, "Yes, that's right.
That's true.
That's right.
That's true." I hadn't remembered that, but yes, he's right.
Of course, he knows the dinosaur's name that I can't think of right now. But anyhow,
it's Rex, isn't
Rex,
it?
yeah, I think it's Rex. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, he catches on.
Oh, I hadn't even made that connection. Good for him.
Yep. Pretty cool. But there are no dinosaurs in this week's episode of Star Trek Picard. There is, however, something that I do want to talk about right out of the gate.
Okay.
And that is something you and I have not discussed, I think, in our previous two discussions of Picard episodes, or a previous one, actually, because I had one discussion with Scott. So maybe that's why we haven't gotten around to it. Well, Scott and I talked about it, but you and I haven't talked about it.
Okay.
And that is, I want to know your thoughts on Jeff Russo's reorchestration, rearrangement, construction of his Star Trek Picard theme. This is the most dramatic shift a Star Trek theme has taken. We've had, seasons seasons 1, 2, and 3 of the original series all have different takes on the theme. Seasons 4 through 7 of Deep Space Nine have a different theme, different take on the theme from seasons 1 through 3. But this is the most dramatic shift we've had in a Star Trek theme. What do you think about it?
I like it. I am one who often skips the credits to get into the episode. But I like this theme, and I've watched it all 3 weeks now because I think it's even different a little from week to week, isn't it? Graphically, not just the music. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I think it's very interesting because I can still hear the original theme he wrote for Picard in there, but it's all darkened up, right? And kind of militarized and mechanized. It reminds me a lot of what they did with those 2 episodes of Star Trek Enterprise when they were set in the Mirror Universe, and they redid the whole credits to show Earth conquering the galaxy and so forth.
Oh, I'd forgotten about that.
It reminds me of that, but I really like the graphic introduction of the Borg ship, and I think now maybe I just didn't notice it in week 2, but this week I very much noticed the Borg Queen's image in the credit sequence. Has that been there?
Yes, that's been there from
all
the
along?
beginning.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So anyway, but I like it. I find it very fascinating, and I like that it still ends with the Alexander Courage fanfare. Like the first seasons did.
Right.
But I find it quite compelling.
It has grown on me. I am someone, it took me a while when the theme changed in Deep Space Nine. I had a really hard time with it because I just loved sitting and listening to those just pure brass harmonies.
Yeah, I still prefer that first 3 seasons version to the other.
It's gorgeous. Yeah, but they did something similar where they had this sort of like cyclical obligato rhythmic element that they've added into this otherwise rather, I don't want to say placid, but legato theme, right?
Yeah, I think that's a fair characterization.
And so but of course I love the Picard melody, I love that melody, and it's so great, and I think it's so beautiful, and the feeling of it in the original version is so it's somewhere between peaceful and ominous and serene and tense. It's just there's just da 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 da. That ending just feels a little bit like what's going to happen? Where's it going to go?
That's interesting. And I would have described it as melancholy.
Oh, that's a good.
That's why I didn't take to it. I did not like it, and that's one reason I would skip it. It didn't do anything for me. So I liked this season's because it's different and very interesting, and all sorts of ominous. Yeah, but I think it's on purpose, and I think you'll get your original version back by the end of the series, end of the season rather.
I don't know. I wouldn't put it past them to have a different version in season 3. Even I'm really feeling that this was retooled for the tone of the season, and I don't expect it to change within the season. Now it could. But we haven't seen that happen in any of the other, series so far. And it's interesting how Discovery and Picard have a similar ethos and a similar idea for their opening title sequence. It's different graphically, but it's the same idea of symbolic elements and elements from the story, elements from the season that become graphically represented and are woven together in this interesting way, with new things being added and changed each season. Picard much more dramatically than Discovery ever has in its 4 seasons.
I guess it will depend on how much they resolve things by the end of season 2. Like, I'm assuming, I don't have any inside knowledge, but knowing how Star Trek goes, I'm assuming they're going to save the timeline.
Yeah.
And so, if that's not done by the end of season 2, and maybe it wouldn't be, and maybe that would be interesting. Maybe season 2, we know Picard is 3 seasons,
right?
So it's a 3-act play. So maybe they'll do like Empire Strikes Back and end us on a down note in a dark place. So that's possible. Yeah, I have to admit, and I've alluded to this before, but I don't share your enthusiasm for new Trek style credit sequences. Prodigy aside, but it's a very throwback, right, to Voyager. Taking the graphic elements and when I first saw the Discovery credit sequence, I was like, they're telling me they're going to deconstruct Star Trek, and that's okay, I guess. But I don't know. It's just because they take the elements and kind of blow them up, and not with an explosion, but I mean, isn't that the technical term?
There was in the season. They'll explode them out.
They take a phaser and take it apart.
Like you see the pieces come apart and come back together. So you can. It's just. I just thought it was I didn't think of it as deconstructive. I just thought of it as, or I didn't read any philosophical intent, in that regard. I just thought it was interesting and fun graphically, and
it's just not my thing. But mileage varies.
That's fine. I was very curious to see, because this theme goes through different shifts and different modes, and has a da 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 da, in part of it. Part of it's very more driving, part of it's more softer and gentler, part of it's more uplifting. It shifts gears at least 3 major times, and it's hard to find the melody line. It gets hidden and tucked away and broken up in different places, and it's just very unusual. I think it's the most unusual theme for any Star Trek series that I've heard, in terms of departing from anything that from having established this melodic structure in the first season, and then to just sort of just change it up so much in the second season, and to not have something you can sing along with the whole time very easily. It's very different. I like it a lot. Jeff Russo's great. I like it better now than I did in episode 1, and I'll probably like it better by the end of the season. But it's just a fascinating thing for me.
I think it's part of the way they're just building this feeling of things are out of joint, things are broken, and so I think I like them doing that it's not something I can hum along with,
right? And
it doesn't stick with me episode to episode, but as I watch it, it pulls me in, because this is serious.
Yes. Well, and that's really interesting too, because I had thought about that, and I don't remember if Scott and I discussed that or not. But the idea that the way it's sort of fractured and goes in and out of different spaces, is very similar, I think, thematically to what's going on in the season. In fact, it relates to something the Borg Queen says early in this episode: go backward to go forward, shatter to mend, the past is now.
Yes.
I found that very interesting.
That's got to be the most poetic, oracular description of time travel we've had in Star Trek, I think.
I think so.
And of course, oracular and poetic is very much how the Borg Queen was most of last week, right?
Right, yes.
But what was interesting, one of the most compelling parts of this week's episode was, I found, after the partial assimilation that Jeri offered herself up for with the Borg Queen talks more coherently, but I think is talking much more like Jeri usually talks.
Interesting.
I mean, it's not quite. It's both when Jeri's doing that partial assimilation, and then after, when the Queen is talking to Picard and Jeri. It's not like either Jeri or the Queen actually become the other, but there's this weird, creepy melding of the two, which results in in Jeri saying some pretty harsh things about Picard, which, are only harsh because there's some elements of truth in them. And then later, the Queen, I mean, this is not how the Queen talked to Picard or Data in the movie First Contact, right? This is a Queen who's got some snark to her.
Yes.
Who's got some humor, but also a lot of menace. So I think Annie Wersching really is delivering a stellar performance.
Yes.
It's absolutely captivating.
And so different.
Boy, it's creepy.
Yeah, and so different from what's come before, which makes sense.
Yes.
And I think it's very good that it's clear that we keep recasting the Borg Queen. I think that's a good thing, because you're not going to have the Borg or this the symbiosis, or not symbiosis, but this combination of the organic and the synthetic. But that organic being came from somewhere and is something, right? Is somebody's face, I assume, right? Either that or they grew that somewhere. So they would make the idea is they make a new queen, every time one is destroyed. And not only that, but it shows that the Borg Queen is the only place the Borg have a personality, the only place that there's emotion expressed. And to see those textures and to see those emotions shift from queen to queen makes a lot of sense, because the Borg have changed since then in those areas that they don't normally show, which is the emotional areas, those different kind of contexts. They might be able to draw on more tools to express themselves through the Queen, or for the Borg consciousness to express itself through the Queen, however you want to look at it. We talked last week about the Borg Queen as Bokor, or as the zombie master. And so I love this performance. I love her ownership of the role, and that she plays with that line between flipping scary and creepy and mysterious and curious and just all these different flashes, all these different feelings come through the sensibility of the character, which makes her enigmatic and interesting and dangerous, and it's just fascinating.
That dangerous, that's what she says, right? To Jeri at the end of that scene. What you've just done here is more difficult and dangerous than you realize. You impressed me.
Yes.
I can't wait to see how that plays itself out.
That was incredible. And I have to say, it just, that whole sequence with the Borg Queen in this episode is so stunning and so visually compelling. Oh, by the way, while we're talking about how visually compelling it is, let's remember that this episode was directed by Leah Thompson.
Yes,
the first one of her directorial stint on this series, which of course is the episode when we travel back in time. So hey,
right, it's very fitting.
That works. But all this stuff, where the Borg Queen, her little container falls over and she's walking around on her hands.
Oh my gosh, where she's crawling over the deck.
Yes, it's like shades of Terminator, and you're like, what's going to happen?
Oh, that's right. I knew it reminded me of something.
Yeah, absolutely. And just then, here, let me try. Let me do it, and just, props herself up and does this thing. I find it interesting, and I mean, this is just me being me. But I find it interesting that the Borg Queen in this episode spends so much time in this cruciform pose.
I was about to say it's not just you. I was about to say the exact same thing. Yeah, I don't know what to make of it.
Right.
But
And
she's definitely in a crucifix pose for most of the episode.
She is, and it's really interesting because, like, it's almost this weird death and resurrection vibe. Because when she's unresponsive and they're trying to take her down and everything, I'm thinking of people taking Jesus off the cross, and I'm like, okay, this is probably just my as indelible Christian imagination working overtime here, but I can't help but respond to those images in that way. I don't know if it's intended that
artists. No, artists don't just engage Christ symbolism to reinforce it. They engage it to subvert it.
Right.
And
True.
to
play with it.
To play with it, to see what, so it's very, and so, who knows whether we find any spiritual significance in it or not ultimately.
Right.
But here at least, I mean, there is a lot of talk about how we need her. We can't do this without her. She's the key. Picard is very intent on keeping her safe, because she is their salvation in that sense.
Right.
They're not going to get through this mission without her. So then it's weird for those who are used to that imagery as Christians to see this crucifix figure. Jesus was taunted while he was on the cross, but here the Borg Queen is doing the taunting while she's on her quote unquote cross.
Right.
What would you like? Well, legs for starters.
Right. I love that.
Boy, it's just but also it's subverting and playing with the idea that at least in some Christian traditions, there's very much an identification with Christ on the cross. In Roman Catholic hospitals, there's crucifixes on the wall so that the person suffering in the hospital can identify with Christ suffering for us. And that's a in that tradition, that's a healing bond, right?
Right.
And there's traditions where the emphasis is very much on identifying with the suffering of Christ, and so I think this episode plays with that imagery, and that may be part of why I find it creepy. At least that I remember being I am Presbyterian, grew up Presbyterian. We don't have crucifixes, but I remember driving past a Roman Catholic church in downtown San Antonio as a kid a lot on the way to my church, and they kept their doors open. And if you drove past, if you were a passenger and not having to watch the road, you could look back and look inside their open door and see this big painted wooden crucifix. And it always scared me as a kid because I didn't have an appreciation yet of why that was important, why that is important in that tradition.
Right.
But there is, regardless of denomination or tradition, there ought to be something scary about the image of Christ on the cross, right? I mean, it's an image of, at least in part, our inhumanity to each other.
Yes.
Crucifixion was so terrible they had to invent a word for it. Excruciating means the pain of being crucified. So I don't know. I think it could be imagery that makes us, we talked last week about having some sympathy for the Borg Queen as she's up there on the stage at Eradication Day.
Yeah.
Or at least I talked about that. And so maybe this imagery kind of dares us to keep feeling that sympathy, because is it sympathy for the devil now? Who knows? Right. Because we get the feeling that she's, we don't just get the feeling, she tells us, right? She has her own agenda here.
Yes.
She has more information than she's
sharing,
let on. And Jeri's got some of it, but knows there's more and says she'll get it eventually. And so I don't know. There's
a lot going on.
It's subverting that imagery to maybe to make the Borg Queen a much, maybe not much more, but as you said, compelling in a different kind of way.
Well, and I as you talk about the last episode, and having sympathy for the Borg Queen and all that, the Borg Queen is up there, as Scott and I talked about, as a scapegoat, and I mean the ultimate scapegoat is Jesus. And then also there's this thing where, she is kind of our salvation in this episode, and Elnor even has to give his life. We'll talk about that. But at the same time, she's also the one who does the calculations and does all the complicated work to get us to be able to do the time jump, the time warp. And the person who did that in Star Trek 4, to which this episode has many references.
Oh, yeah.
The person who did that in Star Trek 4 was Spock, who in my cosmology is our Christ figure.
Yes.
So it's just really interesting that we have intentionally or otherwise, this weird Christ figure-like context or imagery associated with the Borg Queen, who is taking on the role that was previously held by our Christ figure, in my view. So it's a very, I don't know how, I'm not going to start interpreting that yet, but...
Although the difference is, of course, as you've argued eloquently, that was all ultimately Spock's idea and Spock's plan.
Yeah, that's right.
This was Picard's idea.
That's true.
And I think he takes ownership of that. We need her. We need her for this plan. He doesn't say my plan, but it was his idea to use the Borg Queen in that capacity. And they are using her. I mean, they got her consent, I suppose, when they told her this is your only way back to connect with the hive, right? Because they're in the Delta Quadrant waiting for you in the real timeline, whatever. So I think that's a difference. That this wasn't the Borg Queen saying, let's go find us some whales.
Right.
This is Picard's idea, and Picard's got the plan, and he's giving the orders, you three go look for the Watcher. Jeri and I will stay here and revive the Queen. He's taking all the grief for choosing the Queen over Elnor, which maybe I just missed something. I didn't quite get why that was a thing. They needed the power to keep the Queen alive, and so they couldn't give it to the biobed that Elnor was on. Was that it? Or
the Queen was taking over the ship and was taking that power for herself, and we had no control over it. And they were trying to get the power back for the biobed. And I mean, Rafi believes that's why Elnor died. Maybe the biobed would have kept him alive. I don't know for sure. Maybe it would have. It probably would have. But I still felt, in many ways, I don't know. I understood Rafi's feelings to a degree, to a great degree. I mean, she's grieving and all of that.
Well, yeah, grief doesn't always have to be logical.
Exactly right.
It's what we feel. But were she and Elnor established as particularly close last season, and I'm just not remembering? It seemed a little disproportionate to me.
I don't remember, and I almost don't want to go there because I don't think either one of us have enough memory of season 1 to be able to talk about
Now, to be clear, I'm not criticizing her for being upset that he died. I just don't remember
from a writing
enough
standpoint.
Season 1.
That's the thing. I feel like without going back and reviewing season 1, I have a hard time discussing that particular aspect. And it did bother me, and it did kind of I'm like, what is going on? She's acting like Elnor's her son almost. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I'm just not sure. And I mean, time has passed between the seasons. And
as Star Trek often says, if we all felt that keenly about our fellow humans' deaths, no matter who they are,
right?
And I know Elnor's a Romulan, but if we've had that level of empathy when somebody dies, our history might be a lot less bloody. So it's true. Not a bad thing. It just was a question.
That's true. Well, and also I think we remember that at the beginning of this season, you had special attention drawn to Rafi and Elnor.
Well, that's right. They were going to be on the Excelsior together.
Right, and they were in Starfleet Academy together.
You're right.
Rafi, I guess, is an instructor, and Elnor is a teacher. So one can infer that their relationship had grown and developed. I'm not sure based on my memory of season 1 how much of it there was in season 1, but it makes sense that they could be close. Yeah.
That's good.
I would like to have seen a little more of that established more specifically. I think maybe another scene between the two of them in the first episode to show that they had gotten really close a little bit more. But that's probably what's going
good.
on.
Yeah.
It was interesting to me, though. Continuing talking with the Borg Queen, I did feel like Rafi, as she was coming against Picard, I do feel like she's probably angry and maybe saying things she doesn't mean or something. I felt like her criticism of Picard was a bit harsh. But I don't think there's any probably about it. She's angry. Yeah, but I mean undeservedly harsh. I know that she's angry and all that, but I just felt like, the way she talked about him and Q playing around with time, I'm like, I agreed with Picard. No, Q does that. But even at that, I think Q does that for interesting reasons, and we can get into that a little bit later in the episode.
But I remember they went to great pains to establish Picard and Rafi, this character we'd never met before season 1, as close.
Yes.
So I buy that, if she didn't know him as well, she probably
wouldn't lash out.
No matter how upset she was, she would not have felt so free to lay into him the way she does.
Yes.
So is it unfair? Of course. But again, she's grieving.
Yeah.
She's angry. It was compelling character drama. I bought it.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't sure I completely did. It felt a little out of left field for me, but at the same time, grieving character, angry character, Rafi definitely has that capacity. So, you know what
else it reminded me of, frankly, and maybe this is just because my head's in a superhero space for whatever reason, but you know how people will often say, boy, Batman, how could you have ever let the Joker go?
Right.
Like, so even though Q is a lot more powerful than the Joker, there's almost an aspect of, how do you why do you keep putting up with this guy, Picard? Haven't you found a way yet to get him out of your life once and for all?
Right.
I mean, that's there was a little bit of that too.
I found some way to stop him, but how do you stop somebody who can,
Well, right. This will be
Picard's
comeback. Like, the person who can do these kind of things. How do you stop that?
Right.
Yeah, I like that John Delancey was briefly in the episode.
Yes, that was beautiful.
Again, I'm still wanting a lot more John Delancey, but...
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, you get some good John Delancey in the Ready Room episode for last...
Oh, do we?
For
okay,
last episode. Last episode's Ready Room was an interview with John Delancey, and I think it was last episode. Yeah, an interview with John Delancey, and it was so good. And
what does he say here? He says, let's see what else has been lost in the wake of your fear.
Yes.
That's an intriguing line.
That is a very intriguing line. And I'm curious as to what, of course we're supposed to be, but I'm curious as to what fear he's talking about. Is it the fear of the Borg? We that moment when everything changed, when Q showed up, was right when Picard was ordering the auto-destruct sequence, to destroy the Queen. And we think that might be the thing that somehow Q is trying to get him to not do. But I do want to say that Delancey gave some clarity in his interview to Q's motivations in this series.
Oh?
And I don't know if you want to hear it or not.
Sure.
Okay. Delancey was talking about this, and I mean, Paramount let him say it. So, okay, here we go. He was talking about himself as Q, and he said, I'm trying to help you, and I'm sincere. He's like, I mean it. I am really trying to help. Like, there is something that Picard needs to do, a way that Picard needs to change, and I care about him, and I want to help him, but I know that he won't learn the lesson unless he experiences it. And that's what I'm doing. So, for Delancey to say that forthrightly about Q's motivations is quite interesting to me, because in our whole sub-series on Q that we've been doing in our Next Generation series, we talk about how mysterious Q is and how uncertain we are about his motivations. For John to just come out and say that struck me.
Well, I think that tracks with episode 2, though, because... as we talked about, he calls himself a suture in the wound.
Agreed. Yep.
Sutures are there to heal wounds and to encourage their healing. And we talked about how Picard noted that Q was not well, and and we talked about how John Delancey brings this edge of just urgency and gravity to Q that he hasn't quite before.
Yes.
So I think that tracks with what we saw in the second episode. I think. What's the last Q episode in TNG we talked about? Q Who? I don't think he's at that point just yet, but I do agree with you that by the end of TNG, he's at least farther along there. And so clearly now here by this season of Picard, he's there as
as just
kind of the last resort, right? I intervened, he said last episode. So.
Right. So that's very interesting. I'm just incredibly curious.
I'm glad you brought that to the table.
Yeah, I'm incredibly curious to see how And John also said that that there was not a lot of Q in this season, but that everything, of course, orbits around what Q has done. So I don't expect to see more than glimmers of him probably till toward the end of the season.
Well, I'm disappointed to hear that.
Well, I kind of suspected that at the beginning because that's how Q tends to function. Within an episode, he'll just show up at various moments. He's not there the whole time. He doesn't have a lot of long scenes. He'll start out at the beginning, with quite a bit. And then he'll set some events in motion, and then he's gone while we experience it. Especially if you go back to Encounter at Farpoint, we have this whole big conversation, and then he just kind of goes away for a long time, and then he pops up more and more as the story gets more intense, and as we get more and more to the point to which he's trying to get us, then he shows up more. Of course, different episodes go different ways, but that does happen with Q, so I wouldn't be surprised.
For sure, that's Farpoint, but I think about things like Deja Q, where that's the one where he's powerless on the Enterprise, right?
Right. That's
so granted, that's a different situation.
Yeah,
that's a different situation. But I think about those Voyager episodes he's in. He seems to be in quite a lot.
Let's not concern ourselves with Voyager Q, sir. I don't think we need to do that.
No, I don't know, because 7 of 9. Let's talk about Jeri Ryan.
Oh,
boy,
is she amazing?
Man, I saw a thing on Twitter this week which struck me as funny and true. It said, "It's amazing how you don't have to put somebody in a silver cat suit to see them, this well-developed, intriguing character, and it's so true that, she did a great job on Voyager, despite, the objectification that was going on there.
Yeah.
But I just so enjoy her performance as Seven in this series. Last season, I enjoyed it. And this season, I'm enjoying it too. Just the power and the energy and the incisiveness she brings as Seven is. I love the bit where she and Rafi are trying to talk their way past the security guard, and Seven is saying things like, "We want to go up and take a cellular image," and call it a photograph. And by the way, I'm sure you noticed that that security guard says Kevin is not funnier than me.
Thank you. Yes,
your name is in the franchise again.
I know.
You mentioned once recently where there was some instance of your name in the franchise, and here we have, granted, an off-screen character, but there's a whole character named after you.
Yeah, but he said my name, and then he said the word funner, and I'm like, dude, funner is not a word. Don't even.
He said funner. I thought he said funner.
It's funner. Yeah.
Oh,
no.
Okay.
But for me as an editor, that you put my name right next to a grammatical error. Come on. But no, it was kind of cool. Every now and again, somebody's called Kevin, and it's like, hey, yay, that's nice.
Your name survives to the future.
It does. It does.
2024 anyway.
Right.
But I thought she was great in that scene. She's looking at the wildfires raging from, and talks about how, that future we've just come from, the dark future, maybe starting even now. Jeri Ryan is a real revelation as Seven, and she's proving again how good an actor she is.
Yeah, she's really, really great. And I love all the textures and layers that she's bringing to Seven at this stage in the character's development. And just, it's she and Michelle Hurd both, they're so well matched, I think, because they both have the ability to give us all those little inflections, all those little moments, those small gestures, and those just the little things that add so much texture to a performance and show that we've got actors who really know what they're doing and who are very intentional in their choices. And I love that. But that was a very interesting scene because the wildfire thing was really interesting, because we've talked a lot about, I have talked a lot over the years about how in Star Trek history, things have to get worse before they get better. We go into this sort of darker period before we get to the bright hope of the future. And to tie that to something that is currently happening now, that wildfires are a big problem, and they're a big problem because of climate change, which is a big problem because of what we've done with our industry and our technology. I find that fascinating, and it was a very unusually direct callback to contemporary times in Star Trek, to say, hey, you could be ruining your world. And I really appreciated that. It really struck me as an interesting and bold choice. But I also love the interplay between the two characters, because I think their relationship, I've had conversations with friends about the relationship between Seven and Rafi, and where they really are. And of course, if you've gone back and read the prequel novels and things like that, as I have, you have a little more insight into their relationship. But I think it's very much that, like, Rafi is just in love with Seven, and Seven is like adjusting, but it is interesting that it is Seven who suggests that they are engaged to the security guard, who is not Kevin. So I found that interesting as well. So we'll see how their relationship develops. But I love their interaction. Just love. I can't get enough of the two of them.
I do too. And I agree with everything you said about how I think it's great that Picard is addressing today's social issues head on. Seven has that line, "I've never been able to understand how a society could exist with so many contradictions and not collapse sooner than it did."
Yeah. Well, and
I mean, whoa, that is an indictment of us, and well-deserved, and hopefully a goad for us in real life to do better.
Yeah. That's an interesting thing, because again, we go back to what the Borg Queen said at the beginning of this episode: shatter to mend. And it's very interesting, the idea of things have to break, things have to get worse before they can get better. You have to have a crucifixion before you can have a resurrection. And so that's an interesting thing. The opening title sequence repeats that image of the shard of glass from Picard's window that he holds up in the first episode.
Yeah.
And there's something about shattering and mending. There's something about, things being broken in order to come back together, which is interesting when you think about history as having a purpose, and our experiences on this planet as having a purpose. Not that everything is preordained and predestined to the degree that, God has planned every moment of our lives and we have no free will, but rather that the cycle of breaking and mending is a part of our existence, and that it is a part of the story of our time, the story of our universe. That there must be both loss and gain. There must be both tragedy and victory. As you said last episode, the eucatastrophe of Tolkien's invention, the Eucharistic catastrophe, or the euphoric catastrophe, however you want to read that. The idea that the catastrophe, that would be a catastrophe of hope, but that you have catastrophes of tragedy that lead to catastrophes of hope. And that those two things feed off each other. So it's going to be interesting to see how those ideas unfold as we go throughout the season.
One of the other current contradictions we wrestle with that this show addresses head on is immigration, and the how do we treat those who are undocumented in our society. And I really appreciated all the scenes in the clinic that Dr. Teresa is running, where Rios goes. He doesn't want to go to a hospital because, for fear they'll step on some butterflies. Nice callback to Ray Bradbury in this episode, by the way.
Yes.
But the person who finds him after he materializes in midair, and it would be funny, except the fact that he's injured when he falls. But you wonder why that hasn't happened more often. I guess they're good with their transporter.
Right.
But anyway, he doesn't want to go to the hospital for that reason, but the person who finds him assumes it's because he's an undocumented person with no papers, and takes him to this clinic, which serves that population. And I just found that, again, very bold, very appreciated for this show to take that on, where, we're used to seeing people of diverse backgrounds in Star Trek, but it's very rarely about what their ethnicity is, about what their heritage is. Right. But, that shows the difference between that society we hope to be one day and ours, where, because Rios is of Hispanic or Latin origin, it's assumed, he's saying this, no hospital, because he's a migrant worker, or he's somebody else who's in this country without papers, without documentation.
Yeah.
And then we see this whole, so now, the title of the episode is a play on words. It's not just Assimilation Borg, but it's people assimilating into our society, and how do they do that, and what are the risks they take, and why are they willing to do that, and how do we treat people who are doing that? All those questions are raised by that one word title as well.
Wow, that's fascinating. I had not even thought of that connection, but that's absolutely true. And they are trying to assimilate themselves in this episode into the world around them. They're trying to blend in. And that's part of the challenge that they're facing, which of course again reflects Star Trek 4, which came back to our time in the 80s. Now Star Trek is coming back to our time in the 2020s, or 2 years from now, in the 2020s, which is really interesting. We'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, that whole scene, that whole moment with Rios, and you see people who are, trying to help one another, and then you see the police coming, to raid what they're doing, and it's very, it makes you wonder what kind of society, is being reflected, what kind of values are being reflected by what we're seeing in the episode. And of course, we end up with a bit of contamination anyway. We had the whole thing about Rios not taking his phaser, but you have to take your communicator. And that's we have another person who's separated from their communicator, as we had in Star Trek 4. Let's see what happens with that. I don't know.
That's right. Or piece of the action, for that matter.
Agreed. Yeah, indeed.
The communicator, the translator is the basis of all, the transponder, whatever. Yeah. But I thought that was a nice plot element, handled well, with Dr. Teresa's kid wanting the communicator.
Yes, that was a great scene.
And then could talk about timeline contamination. Rios at the end, screw the butterflies. He's trying to help Dr. Teresa, and I thought that was a great character choice, and it made sense for that character, and I liked it a lot.
Well, and I appreciated Rios acting out of compassion in that way. At the same time, he's now in a great deal of trouble because of that. So let's see, what the butterflies have to say.
Well, maybe that's part of the shattering before the menu.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I don't know.
It'll be very interesting to see how it unfolds. You always know, you go back to a timeline and you say no contamination. Oh boy, contamination's going to happen. It's going to happen.
Well, there'd be no story otherwise.
Well, that's true.
If it were, we went back, we fixed it, it's all good. That'd be, we still got 7 episodes to fill.
Yep. What do you think about Elnor? I was very, very upset when he was injured and Rafi came over to him. I was like, don't kill Elnor. Please don't kill Elnor. Oh my gosh, don't kill Elnor. And they did. And I tell you, I had flashbacks to season 1. There were so many unnecessary tragic deaths in season 1. And I was like, don't do this to me again, Star Trek Picard. What'd you think?
Well, I think it's tempered somewhat by the fact that it's a time travel story, and I don't have any doubts that we're going to get him back by the time it's all said and done. Now, again, whether that's the end of this season or not, I don't know.
Right.
I am a little disappointed, I guess, that he's not going to be part of the adventure in 2024. I've wondered if maybe they didn't want to have to go through another thing of how do we hide the ears,
right?
Because clearly they've made the choice to take some of the moments from Star Trek 4 and play them straight and dramatically as opposed to comedically.
Right.
They come back, they're going back in time, right? And there's close-ups on the eyes and time slows down, but there's none of the weird stuff with clay models that was going on in Star Trek 4. That wasn't a comedic choice. That was just a strange artistic choice that, to me, I still kind of puzzle over that. But, so there was none of that. I liked what they did, the sparks going backward and the tear rolling up the cheek as opposed to down.
Yep.
But then there's the line about pollution content. Dr. Girardi says, judging by the fossil fuel pollution and the ozone degradation, or where we want to be. It's not a comic line. It's not Nick Meyer's line about judging by the pollution content, I'd say. It's very, this is how here in 21st century Earth, unfortunately.
Yes.
And then the bits about, there's no line about let's all remember where we parked. They're just very much about their business of here's what we got to find the Watcher. We got to do this and that. So it's interesting to see all that. I mean, it's very reminiscent, as you've said a few times already in our discussion of Star Trek 4, but it's all played for drama. We're not just, it's not going to be a feel good, we can do this. Sure, let's go get some whales kind of adventure, which is the charm of Star Trek 4, but this is a different thing.
Yeah.
So with Elnor, I do think it would have been interesting to see him be that fish out of water in 2024. Yeah. Maybe the choice was it would be too much of a distraction.
Yeah.
So we can't have Elnor around. And it does add a complication, and things have to get worse before they get better dramatically, let alone shattering before mending, whatever that means.
Right.
So it didn't upset me, I guess, in the same way it upset you.
Well,
I think we're going to get him back.
Yeah. It's very probable, I would say. I'm hopeful about it, but I don't know. I'm with Jeri on this. I don't know how it would affect him. I think from a Back to the Future standpoint, which to my mind is the gold standard for time travel, I think they got everything right. From that standpoint, I think Elnor is dead, and there's no way to get him back. I do not see a way to do that. It would have to be some other wibbly wobbly timey wimey thing.
Yeah, Doc Brown wore a vest in Back to the Future, so
yeah, but that was a past.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
I know. I don't mean to make light, because it was a very tragic death.
Yes.
And I appreciated the introduction of the medallion.
Yeah.
With that inscription that means now is the only moment. I can't imagine that won't be a thematic through line for the series, for the season.
Which is really interesting to have that as a phrase we introduce in this episode and in this season that is talking about the interrelationship of the past, the present, and the future. So in the sense that now is the only moment, it's interesting that they sort of hold on to that as a truth, right? That has some foundational meaning for Elnor, which is a very Qowat Milat way of viewing things. But there is a way in which the now that we are making, the now that we are experiencing, doesn't stand on its own. It may be the only moment we can control. It may be the only moment that we can do anything about. And no, we shouldn't let fear of the future or worry about the past impede us in making our choices. But I do think, especially in a time travel episode, we're telling, and a time travel story, we're telling a story in a context that reminds us that wisdom is mindful of the future and the past, even as we are, certain only of the moment. So it's kind of going to be an interesting interplay to me, thematically.
Yeah, I like that. That will be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah.
Now, you said a second ago, you think Elnor is dead for keeps?
In my time travel cosmology, yes. I don't see a way, like I said, without another wibbly wobbly timey wimey thing that brings in some other element that Star Trek invents. According to the rules of time travel, I understand Elnor is just dead. There's no way to get it back. So for me, the possibility that fixing time would bring Elnor back never occurred to me until Rafi brought it up. And even at that, when Agnes says, I don't know, I have to agree with Agnes at best.
Okay.
To me, I think Elnor's dead, but we'll see how they deal with it.
Maybe it's not a foregone conclusion, but it occurs to me that he dies kind of in, or at least a result of, the timeline they're seeking to erase. So if those events never happen,
all right.
As Janeway says, it gives me a headache.
Yeah,
so.
You are getting into a causal loop situation there, which is a big.
You're
problem,
right. Which
so,
I know. Maybe
we'll
Q will bring Elnor back in gratitude for whatever our crew accomplishes.
Right. Maybe so. He's never.
I can see Picard's impassioned plea right now. Q, if you've ever had our best interest at heart, bring this young man back to life. I don't know. I don't think it'll be interesting.
I don't know if he'd demand that of Q, but I wonder if Q would do it. If Q can.
Well, he probably wouldn't.
Yeah, he
come to think of it.
Well, based on the Q we've known, I don't think he would. But this is a different Q.
He might be afraid Elnor would come back with a twist, like some kind of monkey paw situation, or he might be thinking of things like the experience in Who Watches the Watchers, where he admitted to the people, the Mintakans, we can't bring back the dead, and Picard. I don't know. It's interesting because, of course, Picard has had this experience of escaping death for the time being, anyway, at the end of season 1, which I guess he didn't really choose. That was, as I recall, sort of foisted upon him.
Right.
this artificial body he's in. But even then, they made a point of saying, we gave you a body that it's not going to last forever.
Right.
It's got mortality kind of programmed into it. And it's come up once this season, I think, so far. It's not, I think it's kind of, we're supposed to forget about it, frankly. But,
right.
Yeah. So maybe his ideal of, death is a part of life and we accept it, maybe. But then again, it was never, I don't know. I don't know.
It's very interesting. We'll see how it goes. I think the way Star Trek normally tells its stories, since there's doubt about whether Elnor will survive or not, he's most likely to survive. The way I understand time travel, he probably is dead, but you make an argument for the fact that he might not be. So we'll just have to see what happens when we mend the timeline. So we can't know. So, another thing that stands out to me in this episode, apart from the fact that it echoes Star Trek 4 again in having all of our characters split up and do all these different things. Which, it's like, what's the deal? There's so much of the Star Trek 4 structure in this episode. But it has a completely different feeling. Yet not without its levity. But the thing that, again, is such a standout in the episode is Alison Pill. I'm always so impressed with her. And
no doubt.
And her scene of Borg Queen hacking is just phenomenal. And actually, I was reminded of Patrick Stewart's performance in the TNG episode Sarek, when he's experiencing all of Sarek's emotions and having to go through all that.
Good call.
Very much a similar sort of acting challenge that Alison had to meet. Not all in one shot, I'll give you that, but still the same kind of acting challenge and the same kind of scene. I loved all the layers and the interplay between her and the Borg Queen. Whose hand is this? Mine. That was really creepy. It was stunning. The whole scene was so great. You always have those scenes where somebody's in Star Trek, where somebody's being plugged into a thing and it's dangerous, and when do we pull them out? That sort of thing. And it's like, break the connection. You always have the scenes, right? But I thought this was maybe the best one of those that's been done. And so much of it's down to Alison Pill just being amazing.
Well, and I appreciated the fact, and forgive me if I've mentioned this on the podcast before, I kind of feel like I have, so I don't really want to just beat up on Voyager for this, but I remember how in one of the later seasons, the plan was, well, we'll just get assimilated by the Borg.
Oh, right,
I really appreciated how this episode, Picard was so opposed to that.
Yes.
And, because he knows how dangerous it is. And I like the fact they said he couldn't be the one to do it because he was too familiar to the Queen, and she'd have him back as Locutus in a heartbeat.
Right.
And how he only reluctantly agreed to let Jurati do this partial assimilation plan. I just liked giving assimilation the weight it's due as a terrible fate that you don't trifle with.
Yes.
And I really appreciated that acknowledgement being given to it in the script, in the performance.
Yes, I agree with that as well. And it's very much the threat of the Queen. And of course, we're dealing with a Queen this whole time who is not the Queen we met at the beginning of the series. At the beginning of the season.
Right.
That Queen is from a different time. Could be the same. It's the same Queen. It's always the same Queen, even though it's a new Queen, right? Same but different. But it plays into the threat that the Queen poses, and just how dangerous she really is, and yet we have to rely on her to accomplish our goals. It's I think a really great microcosm of that relationship.
It reminds me of, to give Voyager some credit this time, it makes me think of when they introduced Seven and Chakotay tells Janeway that parable about the scorpion.
Yes.
You knew I was a scorpion. and so, I was listening back to either our conversation or maybe your and Scott's conversation about how the Borg want to join the Federation. Well, maybe yes, maybe no. I'm still not quite convinced that what we saw at the beginning of the series wasn't exactly what I thought I was seeing. The Borg Queen trying to assimilate the ship and the Starfleet through it. And I don't know. I just really, I wonder.
Yeah.
I liked everything you said last week about maybe we're finding a way forward with the Borg, but the way the Borg Queen related to our characters this week makes me less certain that that's really in the cards.
Yeah, I don't know, because it's just such a different thing. We're looking at a Borg Queen not only from a different, we're looking for a Borg Queen from a different timeline completely.
True.
So what, and yet it's the same Borg Queen, and yet it's a different Borg Queen. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. It's, I'm open to some kind of conciliatory thing happening, but I would like to see that. I think that's a very Star Trek thing to have happen. I just
Absolutely,
don't know how
it would be
accomplished. Yeah. So
this is why, again, it's hard to talk about Picard episodes discreetly. I think. You can, obviously, we're doing it, but it feels like it really is a tightly constructed story, and it'd just be fascinating to see how it plays out. I think it's shaping up to be one of my favorite seasons of Star Trek from any series. I've loved each one of these 3 episodes so much. I've been so engaged.
Yes, I agree.
Pun kind of intended. I've been so engrossed in what's going on. I find the characters so much more compelling than I did last year, and maybe that's because I know them more. That's entirely possible. There's not the factor of getting to know them anymore.
Right.
But boy, I'm all in for this story, and I can't wait to see how it plays out.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited about it, and I'm just enjoying the journey, and I'm in for it. I'm in for it. Just like you, I feel like it's just great Star Trek, and it's again so different. It's some of the same kinds of stories that we tell in Star Trek, but in many ways so different and so differently told, and such a different feeling than other Star Trek series have. And I really appreciate Picard's uniqueness and its presence as a character story, and as a deepening and an enriching of the narratives and the characters and the world that we've had to this point, by tying it so directly to Picard and Picard's story, and so many other Star Trek stories that we've told. So yeah, I'm looking forward to next episode.
2 quick nerdy things though before we leave this episode.
Please,
Number 1, do you have guesses on who the Watcher is going to turn out to be?
I do.
Do you want to share them, or do you not?
My number 1 guess is Guinan. That is my number 1 guess.
I would not have guessed that.
The idea that they're trying to use alien, like looking for tech, like that leaves a subspace signature to find the Watcher. I don't know if that's going to pan out.
Yeah, I wondered that too.
If it does, and if they're right that it's some alien or whatever, then okay, we'll go that way, and it's not Guinan. But that was my number 1 guess. Past that, I'm not sure. I'm really not sure, but I think it might be someone we know.
Yeah, I don't know either. My only speculation is that, I don't think it's spoiler. It's just because I know they're in the cast and they have to show up sometime. Either it's going to be a character played by Issa Briones or Brent Spiner.
That is possible.
I don't know. It could be Guinan, I guess. But
I'm just trying to think of somebody who would be able to help them with this kind of problem, or have that kind of insight. I mean, one of the things that this reminds me of is the TNG episode Time's Arrow. That 2-parter where Guinan, plays a part. And of course, Guinan was around, possibly on Earth at this time, so who knows, that's the only character we know that I could think of, but I don't know.
That's true. The other second nerdy thing I wanted to not let us miss was props to Jeff Russo for incorporating the Borg motif from First Contact into his score.
Yes.
Note for note, it's there. Doom, 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 doom. And it's wonderful. And I love, it made me so happy.
Well, not only the Borg motif, but I did not hear it in the episode, but I know it's there, and I'll have to go back and see. But Jay Chataway's Lullaby Number 2 from The Inner Light is also quoted because there's a credit for it in the end credits. Yes. So go back, kids. Go back, kids at home, and listen to the episode and see if you can figure out where that is. It might be.
Is that the theme from Inner Light that everybody knows and plays at weddings and stuff, or no?
Yes, it's the Ruskin flute. Yes,
is that one?
Yep.
Oh, where does that show up? I wonder.
I don't know. I wonder if it's quoted in the main title. I'm curious if in this new one it's quoted in there somewhere that we just haven't noticed, or if he quoted. I'm trying to figure out what in this episode would cause him to want to quote that. So my guess is that it might be in the main title, and we've just missed it the past 3 times we've heard it. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, I will listen for it, especially next week.
Yes, and watch for it in the credits because that will help us find out. So anyway, there you have it. So, as we contemplate the mystery of Lullaby Number 2, we must also contemplate the mystery of our Star Trek trivia, which we
mystery soon to be revealed.
We must have the apocalypto. So let's do that.
I'm feeling better about these than last.
I am too. I'm more confident in my answers this time. So let's lock them in. Well, let's submit them in 3, 2, 1.
All right.
Okay, there they are.
All right. So, question number 1, where do a small number of Borg drones go during regeneration that allows them to exist as individuals? They obviously go to the little drones room. No, that's not true. The answer, you said Unimatrix 0. I said Unimatrix 0, and indeed, the answer is Unimatrix 0.
Yes, that is
all right.
An epic, important Borg episode. So
It is. Number 2, when does the Federation initiate protocol for first contact, capital F, capital C, in quotes?
Yeah.
The answer you submitted was when it becomes apparent the civilization has developed warp drive or other interstellar travel technology.
Yeah.
I said when a civilization achieves warp speed. And the answer is when an alien culture develops warp drive capability.
Right. But I would say that's an oversimplified answer, honestly. I mean, we both got it right, and I know that was what they were going for, but I think it's more than that.
Well, yeah, and I think by not tying it to a particular series, like we never heard that until TNG, right?
Right.
I thought, I mean, I don't know what the criteria was in TOS, to be frank.
True.
If it was ever discussed, or if it was just when the Federation decided it was expedient to make first contact, or I don't know, because they had made first contact with civilizations that hadn't achieved warp speed in TOS, hadn't they?
Yeah, I mean, they most of the time accidentally, or like
accidentally.
I'm thinking Bread and Circuses, which established the General Order Number 1, the Prime Directive.
I was thinking about a private little war. Like the people on that planet know that Kirk and McCoy are from. Well, I'd have to go back.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look because, when that was part of the thing that they were a pre-warp civilization and all that sort of thing, or a primitive civilization anyway. But I mean, if we it's a retcon. But if you go back to First Contact, the film, it is, of course, Zefram Cochrane's warp signature that causes the Vulcans to turn around and take a look at Earth, which I think happens a little too quickly in the film. I think it's over.
Oh, really? You're going to pick that?
I'm sorry. It's cool in the movie, but it's still like...
We don't know how much time passes between those scenes.
I guess. But still, I think it's a little bit it's a little bit, it's oversimplified to say that it's just about warp technology. That's a big deal because that means that civilization is not only sufficiently advanced to know that there's something else out there, but they're on the cusp of becoming involved in the interstellar community. And so it makes sense to make first contact because we want to make sure that, they know what's going on out here, and we try to make a good impression and all that sort of thing.
Yes, and see, really, involvement in the interstellar community might be a better criteria because we know that planet on Neural was having contact with the Klingons. That was the whole issue, right? The Federation felt they had to keep the balance of power among the factions. Right. So now what I don't remember is whether Kirk and McCoy hadn't been around the first time, but I know Kirk had been there once before. I don't know whether he'd revealed, hey, I'm from the Federation and we're giving you these weapons so the Klingons don't overtake you.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm digressing.
It is interesting. I don't know. But anyway, so question number 3.
But we both got it right.
We both got it right.
So hey, yay for us. Mm-hmm. Number 3, Wallace Shawn played Grand Nagus Zek in Deep Space Nine, and as we said, did so wonderfully. Named the 1980s fantasy film directed by Rob Reiner in which he played the Buttercup kidnapping Vizzini. You and I both said The Princess Bride, and inconceivably, it is The Princess Bride.
That was a bit of a giveaway, though. I mean, they mentioned Rob Reiner, they mentioned Buttercup, they named the character.
They did.
It's like,
that was an easy question. I think.
Yes.
For anybody who knows movies at all, that was a gimme question.
Well, you're talking about Wallace Shawn, and then you say, name the 1980s The Princess Bride.
Well, yes. I mean,
that's it.
Now, I admit there are people out there who don't know The Princess Bride.
That is
that
true.
Would be a harder question for them.
That is true. Agreed.
But yeah, that's such a great movie, and my whole family's a fan of it, and we've seen it several times.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Oh, just such fun.
Yep.
Such fun.
Yep. Well,
have fun storming the castle.
Well, that's what Wallace Shawn did in the 80s, but what are we going to do next week?
Next week, we're going to be talking about Season 2, Episode 4 of Star Trek Picard. Title not yet announced, but I'm anticipating it will be a great episode. I sure hope so.
I'm looking forward to it, and I hope everybody who's listening to us now will join us for that. And in the meantime, please like, comment, and share. And if you like what you're hearing, please write a review on iTunes or wherever you're listening. Your reviews help more people find out about our show and let us know how we're doing. Also, send us your feedback and questions. You can find us at Gospel Trek Pod on Twitter and Instagram, and The Gospel According to Star Trek on Facebook. Or email us at gospeltrekpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to talk about your feedback on the show. And you can support the show by subscribing. You'll get early access to each week's topical episode, which we will have next week, plus outtakes and bonus content. Just click the subscribe button wherever you listen. And that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. Thank you so much for being here. And until next time. I'm the Dread Pirate Roberts. No, I mean, I'm Mike Poteet. And I'm Kevin Senes. And as Jesus said in John 10:10, live long and prosper. See you next time.